Have you ever wondered why we have two flags on our bima? I remember in my very early days at Temple sitting with our ritual committee considering why that should be. After all, we were getting ready to move into this new sanctuary, and we were asking questions like, how will the new space be decorated? What will be new because of the new building, and what will be present from the old building? Clearly, we elected to keep, from the old building, the two flags on the bima. But why? Reviewing rabbinic literature, namely as interpreted through the Reform Movement's Rabbinical Responsa Committee, which handles matters of Jewish law and Reform Judaism, we learned that there is a case to be made for not having the flags and for having the flags. It was not the least bit surprising that there should be multiple opinions, as the response was from a group of rabbis drawing on Jewish law and heritage, after all. We learned that we were not obligated to put them on the bima, nor without precedent, nor justified in not putting them on the bima. I've sent an excellent article, and will again share it, that appeared about 3 years ago on this very issue, written by one of my professors from the Hebrew Union College, where he explores the history of flags on the bima, particularly in America, and since the creation of the modern state of Israel. In short, we Jews take what is popular in the culture around us. As the popularity of displaying the American flag grew after the Civil War, it began showing up in American synagogues, and most assuredly so after the First World War. Concurrently, and then not too much later, with the growth of modern Zionism and ultimately the foundation of the modern state of Israel, the Israeli flag appeared on the bima, though not universally in Reform synagogues until after 1948 and onward. Side note, some early reformers were adamantly opposed to professing a belief in a return to our ancestral land, and the idea of fusing nationalism with, strange as it may sound, our being a people attached to a specific land, despite our people having been born there and never actually having left there either. While the flags are not there to be worshipped, they are there for us to take account of their symbolism and the nations for which they stand. In fact, those two flags on our American bima are an example of how we, as Jews, speak multiple languages. We speak American and we speak Jewish, which, like it or not, means we are connected with the land of our people and the modern state of Israel, as well as our nation of the United States. In the case of the American flag, for us, generally speaking, the flag represents freedom. As this land has been a haven and a home for Jews for 400 years, when others have rejected us, and even when this country, the one represented by the flag, rejected us, as in the case of the colonial governor, Peter Stuyvesant, in 1654, jailing the first group of Jews who arrived in New Amsterdam, not wanting them to be able to settle there. This country placed upon us quotas in immigration, universities, assorted jobs, and justified segregation against us, housing laws, voting laws. Our overarching takeaway as American Jews, particularly of the last 70 years, this country, represented by this flag, has allowed for the greatest flourishing of any Jewish diaspora community in the history of our people. In the case of the Israeli flag, for us, generally speaking, the flag represents Jewish sovereignty that came on the heels of the massive slaughter of what had been the largest Jewish diaspora community in a place that had been our home for hundreds and hundreds of years, though in which we, before the Enlightenment, were a lowly caste segregated into shtetls or ghettos with limited mobility and limited access to performing various trades, and kicked out or murdered at the whim of a local or regional authority. The design and the presence of the Israeli flag predates the Holocaust, but since 1948 has been a source of great pride as our people entered its third commonwealth in the land that has been our home for 3,000 years. Sadly, though, I had to write generally speaking, because our American Jewish feelings are not universal. The fact that we disagree is not surprising, but the fact that we see things so differently on something as fundamentally symbolic and important as our flags, that is unsettling to me. On more than one occasion, I have spoken with someone of the younger set, though not exclusively, who sees the American flag as antithetical to freedom and sees the Israeli flag as a symbol of human rights abuses, oppression, and all that is wrong in our world today, and even feels shame as a Jew that Israel has become as they perceive Israel to be. We are alive during a period now when both symbols are either under attack or being manipulated for advancing a particular political agenda. The left sees in both flags colonizers, oppressive white domination over people of color, wealthy capitalists, ethnic cleansers, and right-wing extremists. The right grabs hold of their flag, declaring that they are the sole owners of the original call of their country, and their aims are, or ought to be, the real, authentic American or Israeli agenda. Our nations are interlocked, and another time I can discuss what the American flag means to me and why our nations are interlocked. But for our community, on this holiday of Yom Kippur, I want to explain what the Israeli flag symbolizes for me and where I hope we can learn and grow together this year. The flag of Israel holds one of the oldest and one of the newest symbols associated with our people. The blue stripes are for the talit and the blue thread that is to run through the tzitziot, the fringes, as we're commanded in the book of Numbers. Those stripes remind us of being called into nationhood and being a holy people unto God. We are uniquely destined with the Torah as our guidebook and God at our side. The Jewish star, the Magen David, the shield of David in Hebrew, is a symbol that comes to be associated with the Jewish people closer to the Middle Ages than the time of King David. That six-pointed star has been used by us with pride, though also against us, to highlight our presence so others can rage against us, even murder us simply for being Jewish. The current flag turns that yellow star of the Nazis that the Nazis forced us to wear so we could be readily visible as contaminants to the larger society, to become the heart of the flag that represents us being redeemers of our own story and creating a safe haven for our people in our people's land. I worry beyond words when I learn of Jews who fight against the flag, either one, quite frankly, because those two flags have been a lifeblood for us. We can both celebrate their country's greatness while also accepting the flaws and the horrors that have occurred in America and in Israel. The Israeli flag, or the nation for which it stands, has not always done right, but to attack it, uniquely often, with epithets like apartheid, colonizers, ethnic cleansing, is at a minimum inaccurate, but often used without similar wording for nations where such things actually are occurring to millions upon millions of people. When Israel is called an apartheid state, I invite the accusers to see the new government of Israel that was formed just weeks after the most heightened level of Jewish and Arab, or Arab and Jewish hatred in the last 73 years of Israel's existence. The new government coalition bonded over a hatred of former Prime Minister Netanyahu's politics that pit Jew against Jew and Arab against Jew. Those 8 parties that currently govern include left and right, Arab Islamists, religious Zionists, men and women, a Reform rabbi, and secular Tel Avivnikim. My teacher and much published author, Yossi Klein Halevi, has said, this is a model government in Israel right now for how to navigate political and cultural differences in other societies. Ideological rivals are not existential enemies, and there is more that unites us than divides us. I know that there are many in our congregation desperate to learn about the situation in Israel, and many have come to study in our offerings over the last year. I offered an afternoon learning session last spring in my backyard as the rockets were flying. Granted, it was last minute. Who knew I would need to do such a thing? I offered for our teens. One family showed. 2 congregants invited me for lunch as a result of their asking, can you help me understand what is going on and how to respond? I offered learning on Zoom for our congregation with one of the sharpest minds for understanding the situation. We had a double minion. This is not me crying sour grapes, sour apples for not enough attendance. It's to remember we have a very important call to us today based on what's going on in our world. The social media posts have been scaring and scarring and confounding and confusing our young people especially, though adults as well. With the massive amount of anti-Zionism rhetoric that immediately bridges to anti-Semitism, this is not a time for complacency. I am in no way the sole voice for you to consult. In fact, I encourage you not to rely upon me solely. Nor am I sorry for what I prepared for those who have come to the offerings. But what is happening right now is a story and a lesson that we need to talk about. Or just as those classical reformers who were so busy denying the need for a state of Israel in the 1920s and 30s were proven tragically wrong within their own generation. The anti-Zionists on college campuses and in some Jewish organizations, including synagogues, only harm our people and forsake the sacred tradition that we've inherited and we are obliged to uphold. If we fail to engage meaningfully and try to discuss, discern, develop connections with each other and understanding the larger global, let alone Israeli, reality, we will be forsaking the generation and our brothers and sisters and cousins of generations that came before and currently in the land of Israel and in our beloved United States. Just as placing the American flag on the bima grew out of outside influence in America to show patriotism and loyalty, so are we, American Jews today, reflecting the divided and polarized world around us. We do so to our own peril. I will be following this sermon up with links and ideas to gather on a semi-regular basis to talk about Israel using podcasts, songs, histories, books, articles, nothing too long or even that you necessarily need to prepare for. You might like none of what I offer. Okay, great, come and say why. You might like everything that I offer and think that these resources are your new truths. Great, come, tell the group why. As I do begin this final loop around the Temple Emanuel track, I want to make sure I'm teaching what I'm committed to in my core and that we engage in one of the most important topics of our day as American Jews. Come to agree, come to disagree. It seems so basic, this idea that Yossi Klein Halevi put forward. Ideological rivals are not existential enemies, and there's more that unites us than divides us. But we have to relearn that lesson, b'chol dor vador, every generation, if we have ever actually learned it. We can agree, we can disagree. It may not be possible in the halls of Congress or in the North Carolina state legislature, but we can at least try in the circles that we do inhabit, like our homes and our communities. We can, and we are called to speak multiple languages. We speak American and Jewish. That is why we have a bima and not a pulpit. We light the menorah and not the candelabra. We eat challah or bagels or pita. Please don't put the word bread after any of those three. We nosh at oneg and we kibitz with each other. But we also sing Go Down Moses at our Seder, and we sing Adon Olam to Yankee Doodle Dandy on the Shabbat near July 4th. Thanksgiving conjures images of Sukkot, in part because it was allegedly based on Sukkot. But a holiday of Thanksgiving? How Jewish? We vote because the rabbis tell us not to separate ourselves from the community and to pray for the welfare of the government. But what we must not do, we cannot take each other down, neither as Americans nor as Jews. And while there may be much, too much, that divides our nation, may we not allow Israel to be one of those things. We need to enter a place of discomfort in order to get to greater comfort. Yom Kippur is all about the uncomfortable realities of how we as individuals and as a community and as a society behave. We cannot continue as enemies just because we disagree. The way ahead is not by digging our heels in, but rather in turning our sword-like words into plowshares that turn the conversations into a fruitful and productive place for our nations, the physical one in which we live and the national one with which we are eternally connected. And we do that best if we can learn to speak multiple languages and listen to one another with the intent to understand. May we do so with warm hearts and loving respect in good health. Shana Tova. May it be a good year.